Welcome back. Now, the ANC says that it has declared 2023 to be the year of decisive action to advance the people's interests and the renewal of its movement. And giving his political review report at the party's NEC Lekgotla yesterday, ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa said that the 55th conference of the ANC has resolved to put the people first. Now, he said that specific action should be taken to renew the ANC, and the byproduct of a renewed ANC will be a renewed South Africa. The party says that the primary aim of this Lekgotla is to track implementation of the decisions taken at previous Lekgotlas. Author and political analyst Professor Susan Booysen joins us in studio now, or rather via Zoom. I wish she was in studio, but she is there via Zoom. Prof, good morning. Thanks so much for speaking to us.
Good morning, Sakina. Thank you very much.
Now, Prof, President Ramaphosa's speech, of course, peppered with the same everyday matters that, bedeviled South Africa, stuff that we can rattle off: the social grants, energy crisis, unemployment, service delivery failures, lawlessness, and the usual platitudes, of course. But where I suppose it became slightly more interesting is when the president started talking about the 55th conference and the recognition of the full scope of the problems facing the people, and that they have firmly resolved as the ANC to take an urgent and decisive course of action to put the interests of the people first. So what did you make of that? Does this mean to imply that the ANC hasn't up until this point been fully aware of the problems facing the country and its people?
Sakina, indeed, you've put your finger right on the big problem, and that is how the ANC, having been in power for 28 years and having had so many opportunities to implement it and to make urgency of these critical matters, now epitomized in the energy crisis with its repercussions for investment, basic services, and hunger, and how the ANC can, in a election period, persuade people of South Africa, citizens and voters, that indeed it is able to do things faster, things better, and that it has, in famous ANC parlance, a plan to get South Africa out of it. So it is as much about getting it real and more concerted, also a word that is given a lot of emphasis here, real and more concerted efforts, action, to balancing that with the perceptions of the electorate, to make sure people believe, and these are virtual words in Ramaphosa's political overview yesterday, to make sure it gives assurances to the electorate that it has got a plan to get South Africa, a concerted plan, specific plan to get South Africa out of it, out of the energy crisis, load shedding, etc., that we're going through at this stage. And so that comes and really plays into the elections coming next year, 2024, in which the ANC would have to define that it has been suffering a decline in support and decline in trust of the people. So it is an exercise through images and some actions, and very much images of renewal, of regrounding of the ANC, that the ANC hopes to postpone a fate of serious, fatal electoral decline.
So the year of decisive action to advance the people's interest in 2023, Prof, which is, of course, the run-up to next year, which is an election year. So no surprises there that the ANC obviously would want to put its best foot forward and make sure that, the work that it does in this year lingers in the mind of the electorate as they go to the polls. But if we break it down, take, for example, the grant situation, and the president mentioned this at NASREC at the 55th conference as well, on several occasions. 18 million grant beneficiaries in South Africa, and these include state grants such as old age pensions, child support grants, disability grants, and the like. Now, again, it just is a bit jarring to listen to this and how it is posited every time, as if this is something that the ANC prides itself in, that 18 million people are in fact dependent on social grants from the government, instead of being concerned that there are so many people that would depend on government grants for relief from their living conditions and standards. What's your take on that, Prof?
Yes, that is such a predicament. It's not at all really a compliment for the ANC that there are so many people that are being looked after by the state. Yes, it has to be a caring state in the face of poverty and so many of the social ills that afflict society. Yes, it is a state that brings out that support, but simultaneously, the fact that that kind of support is needed, and is needed on a scale of 18 million, plus another around 7 million social relief of distress grants that came in more recently, around 25 million people in South Africa, close to half, towards 1/2 of the population, receiving some form of assistance, social assistance, livelihood assistance from the government. And yeah, I think recognition of this duality, ambiguity of this fact of support and dependency amidst such adverse conditions. There was a brief reference to that in Ramaphosa's speech, in his political overview yesterday. And yet it is a very, very disconcerting feeling overall for South Africans in general, to think that there's so much dependency, so much failure, evidence of failure of social policy in South Africa. So it is, and it brings home the sense of how far South Africa has to go in just bringing the necessary social upliftment. We're not even thinking of generalized prosperity in society at this stage. And it puts the ANC in a very powerful position as well, because it remains in charge of what voters often refer to in research that we do as the parent state, the parent who brings home the food at night. And irrespective of whether it is a state benefit, any political party in government will do exactly that. It is something that has become very closely associated with the ANC, and is a big asset, a big advantage that the ANC as a governing body has, engaging not just with the citizens generally, but also putting it on a platform when it comes to elections.
So that's the one big one. And of course, you know, there could be various arguments on this one particular issue, Prof, because some would say that the state absolutely has to provide that safety net in the absence of jobs for a big chunk of South Africa's working age and working class population. So there's obviously that discrepancy to take care of. But on load shedding, the president said, and just to quote him, "We have to reassure the people that we have a clear path to ease load shedding over the next few months and achieve energy security. And in doing so, all of us must speak with one voice, providing people with confidence that it is within our ability to address this crisis." Did you read anything into these words when the president spoke? You know, we must speak with one voice, considering that on the one hand you have Minister Gwede Mantashe, who's been vocal, you know, in terms of this mixed energy a proposal that we must have as a country. President Ramaphosa himself sees with the transitioning to the low carbon economy and everything that's been said around that. Pravin Gordhan having now the state-owned enterprises that will need to be moved to their variant line portfolio ministries, as it were. What did you read into all of that?
Yes, it first place, it was such careful choice of words that not promising an end to it, but a lessening, lowering out the stages of load shedding. And for the ANC, it would be devastating going into the elections, for speaking on this general line, with load shedding at the levels it is at now, at this current stage. However, if it can either improve the situation or manipulate. We know how phases can be manipulated around big national events. Manipulate that to a sufficient extent and have that as a platform going into the election, that would be a massive advantage for the ANC. However, in the meantime, as Ramaphosa indicated in his speech yesterday, there are so many different aspects that have to be settled. And even in the next week, we're going to see probably indications as to how the line departments and SOEs are going to be aligned, whether big issue Minister Gwede Mantashe is going to remain in that portfolio in charge of ESCOM, perhaps. We know in ANC there's much resistance on that. Different voices certainly coming out in ANC on that, and so many different voices coming out around ANC, different people in ANC, powerful high-level people in ANC, and ESCOM and others, as to exactly how long it is going to take to get South Africa out of this crisis. We see the different calculations of megawatts coming from renewables, coming from private circuits, coming from neighboring countries' networks. We see those stacking up. And everybody also, not everybody, but there are quite a few divergent estimations as to exactly how many megawatts can be secured from which sources. So there is a long way that the ANC would have to travel, not just to speak in one voice on this issue, but really to put forward any persuasive voice to ensure South Africans that it is actually in charge, that this is a government that can address this huge crisis of our time that doesn't just affect investment, but it directly affect the livelihoods. For even food security of South Africans are now affected more than before, even if it had not already been in peril before. So different voices certainly have to come in on one front, and not just one front, but it has to be a concrete, persuasive message. And more than a message, South Africa is really beyond the point of more government plans, more promises, more assurances that there are commissions and investigations and task teams and crisis committees. But we need to see, and the citizens generally have to see, what is being done, the progress that is being made on a daily basis. We want to have not just the details of the breakdowns as different ESCOM power plants, but we want to see how differently sourced megawatts are actually stacking up into bolstering the national grid. If that can be done, that will be evidence of concrete progress. At this stage, South Africans are very cynical and not much else is going to suffice.
And just finally, Prof, also the notion of organizational renewal laced through the speech of the ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa. But what's your interpretation of Ramaphosa's remarks that the ANC has to renew itself because the success of South Africa depends on the success of the ANC?
Well, that is certainly the line that in some respects it has validity, because the ANC remains the biggest, the dominant party in South Africa, even if it's in decline, even if other political parties are coming in, for example, through coalitions. But the ANC remains the biggest party in South Africa, quite by far. And in that way, being in charge of government, there is a direct link there. But it's also a line that the ANC would like to promote and would like people to believe generally, because they do not want citizens to consider alternatives. For the ANC, it is very important, therefore, to get this idea of renewal. Renewal at this stage basically means, most concretely, I would say, the fight against corruption. And it was interesting for me, one of the phrases Ramaphosa used yesterday, we see it in corruption is the enemy of the people of South Africa. I would have liked to see him complete his sentence and the enemy of the ANC, but the rest of his sentence instead was, and ANC takes a very strong, strict line on this. So for the ANC, I believe at this stage, Renewal really centers on fighting corruption. And Ramaphosa people really want to trade on the fact that they are now quite firmly in about 2/3 of the NEC that we saw as evident in the voting for the NWC, National Working Committee of the ANC, over the last weekend. About 2/3 of the NEC are in support of Ramaphosa. But it means there are significant voices that are not in the Ramaphosa camp. And it's also for Ramaphosa very important to get that kind of unity unchallenged movement in government. So that is important that the ANC, that Ramaphosa now has that kind of support in ANC. Simultaneously, it means that there will be no excuses, no pardons on further delays in getting so many of these crises like the energy crisis in South Africa absolutely right, and not to postpone and just not get the action concretely notched up and share the records of those actions as they accumulate.
Professor, thank you so much for your time this morning. Author and analyst Professor Susan Booysen on the ANC's opening, commenting on Ramaphosa's address during the ANC NEC Lekgotla yesterday.